Welcome back to Three Men and a Mystery. I'm one of the three men, John Lorden.
And this is Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
On today's episode, we're going to learn all about the emerging technology that helped locate Coley McCraney, discuss privacy concerns with public DNA databases, and a lot more. Thanks to the hard work of Mike Morford, we have interviews with Parabon Nanolabs, GEDMatch, and DNA genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick. Before we get into those interviews, I first wanted to put a question to you guys. We've all covered cases on our separate media avenues that have been solved using DNA genealogy. What are some of the cases that stand out to you in particular? Let's start with Morph.
For me, the one that sort of started the dominoes rolling was really important is the Golden State Killer case, because that's the first time this forensic or genetic genealogy has been used to track someone down, and it sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah, and that wasn't a case where Parabon was involved, right?
That's correct. It wasn't Parabon.
Who's responsible in that case for doing that work?
That was Barbara Ray Ventnor.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting. And working with a detective that was learning about this at the time as well, right? Paul Holes?
Paul Holes.
Yeah. So they're kind of the pioneers in terms of really making a run at a major case using this technology. And of course, as soon as that broke, then a lot of questions arose of, well, what about the legality? Is this going to hold up? And we're still waiting for the trial in that case, right, Morph?
Yeah. And it's funny when you think about it, all these cases that we've seen solved, none of them have made it to trial because the people they charged were pled guilty. So we've yet to see one of these cases make it to trial and go through an entire trial.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe Coley will be the first one. What about you, Gray? A case solved using DNA genealogy that really resonates with you?
I would say the April Tinsley case. I had done a few videos on the April Tinsley case months prior, and as soon as the Golden State Killer case broke and the news came out, I was thinking, God, what a perfect technique to use on the April Tinsley case. And then, boom, an arrest was made, and they arrested John Miller, who literally looks like the monster that he is. I mean, that case really touched me because April Tinsley was 8 years old, just having fun outside, went to get an umbrella, and then some monster just kidnapped her and killed her and just threw her on the side of the road. And then he taunted police for years after that with notes, one message on a barn, and then he left notes on bicycles. And I mean, it was just amazing. And this guy finally got arrested because of DNA. And I think they used Parabon in that one because I think they even had one of the phenotype reports of John Miller, but it sure didn't look, I mean, it had the right skin tone and everything, but it didn't look like the actual guy at the end.
You're talking about the Snapshot product, which is something that we've talked about in personal conversations a lot. Actually, in the case that stands out to me, the Christy Murat case, they did also use the Snapshot product. But DNA genealogy ultimately is what led them to Raymond Rowe, also known as DJ Freeze, who was primarily a wedding DJ. Another terrible story. And it was interesting because once they found him, we were then able to look at a picture of him and look at a picture of the Snapshot product. And while there were certainly some similarities, you know, the Snapshot product is not like producing a photograph of the person. And that's maybe an ideal that it's going to get closer to as they get better with predictive technology and understanding DNA sequencing better. But it will at least give you a rough idea. So we'll keep that in mind as we're going through this information today. So how did it go down in the case of J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett? This is information from the New York Times. Chief Walker hired Parabon, a forensic consulting firm specializing in genetic genealogy, to assist with the case. The first few steps involved in identifying DNA this way are typically the same. A genetic profile is uploaded to GEDMatch, a genealogy database popular with family history researchers and more recently law enforcement. Then the team of genetic genealogists hopes for a close match, ideally something in the third cousin range. In this case, The relatives were more distant, said Cece Moore, who leads Parabond's genetic genealogy team. When I looked at this case initially, I didn't think it would be an easy one, Miss Moore said. Still, her team was able to build out a family tree, connecting the closer matches to a common ancestor and then filling in the branches with an array of publicly available data. In the end, it was a lucky coincidence that altered the direction of the investigation. Though the Parabon team was not able to create a probable suspect list, the family tree hinted at several possible surnames. When Chief Walker looked at the list, one stood out, McCraney. I recognize that last name, he said, because he had a high school classmate with that surname. Mr. McCraney agreed to provide DNA, according to his defense lawyer. When investigators compared his DNA to the DNA from the crime scene, it appeared to be an exact match, Chief Walker said. So that's a little bit different than we typically hear in these cases. Moore, if you want to tell me how it typically goes with these.
So the normal procedure is to get that list of names, and then you don't want to tip or alert the people on that list that they're potential suspects. You want to collect that DNA, secretly. So in most cases, April Tinsley, Christy Marak, those cases, Golden State Killer, any of those cases, the DNA is collected from trash usually, or they follow the suspect and wait for them to discard a piece of gum, a cigarette butt, something along those lines. Then they get a verification that there is a 100% match. And from there, they take the suspect down without warning. So there's no risk of a suicide, a shootout. They don't want to give them any chance to flee or anything unusual to happen. So for this to go down the way it did is not the norm as far as these cases go.
Any thoughts on that, Gray?
Well, you think that maybe they did it differently in the Coley McCraney case because they don't have as much information and they wanted to engage him and see how he reacted. Where the other cases, they already know a crime was committed. April Tinsley was murdered. Okay, so they wanted to get that information clandestinely because they knew that the person who left the DNA is the killer. In this case, there could be a possibility that Coley McCraney had a relationship that was unknown to people to J.B. Beasley, and perhaps the DNA was left a different way. So they probably tried to engage him to get a feel for how he would react to being asked for his DNA.
That's something about this story that is striking me. And I agree with you. I think that because they didn't have a fine list of possible suspects, they were really trying to drill in. The pretense of this is that they didn't expect Coley to be the exact match. They just thought that having his genetic information was going to help them drill down further. Do you guys find that believable? Because it's kind of weird to me that Parabon would send Chief Walker this big list of names and he goes, oh, I know that guy. And off that list, he happens to hit, just right off the first pick. What are the odds of that? Does this sound believable to you?
I don't know. It's again, I'm going by the pattern so far, and I don't know of any cases in which the person that got the list of names knew the suspect. But again, this is a small town, so there's a good chance that he would have known him. But to me, it's sort of a conflict of interest. I don't know why he would want to personally go there directly. It seems like something that could come back later on as some kind of conflict.
Yeah, I guess I have kind of a weird gut feeling about it, but who knows? Maybe it's just one of those things that's meant to be.
We'll be back to dive into Parabon Nanolabs, GEDMatch, and more about DNA genealogy right after this break.
We know that you like listening to Three Men and a Mystery. Heck, you're here with us right now. But did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this podcast?
Podcoin is a new free app where you can literally get paid to listen to podcasts.
Listen to podcasts and earn Podcoin while you listen.
You turn that Podcoin in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, or you can even donate your Podcoin to charity.
And what is great about it, knowing how much all of you love to listen to podcasts, the more you listen, the more you earn.
So download the app right now. It's available for iPhone or Android. And use our code 3MEN to get 300 Podcoin just for signing up.
Enjoy all your favorite shows on Podcoin after you sign up with code 3MEN to earn rewards even faster. Do more than just listen. Listen and get rewarded with Podcoin. Welcome back, and please keep in mind that our sponsors are helping us raise funds that will go towards investigating this case further and honoring the lives of JB and Tracie, so please show them the same support they're showing us. Now let's learn more about the company that made the identification of Coley McCraney possible, Parabon Nanolabs. Who did you interview there, Morph?
Yeah, for my podcast, Criminology, in season 4, we did a complete season about cases that were solved using genealogy and DNA. And I hope you'll check that out. But we interviewed Stephen Armentrout, the CEO of Parabon Nanolabs.
So I'm the CEO here. Parabon Nanolabs was founded in 2008. Parabon Nanolabs is a DNA technology company. We both build things out of DNA and we analyze DNA. And so for the forensics world, we analyze crime scene DNA in a different way than traditional methods. We first started this part of the business doing DNA nanotechnology, and it was only thanks to a government solicitation looking for something called DNA phenotyping that we got into the business. And in 2011, Department of Defense issued a solicitation looking for tools that could predict appearance from DNA. And what evolved over the course of about a 4-year period of time was a technology that's now called snapshot DNA phenotyping.
It's really interesting to hear that their background wasn't even necessarily a focus on this type of use of their technology. But from there, we learn much more, including what does Parabon do differently in terms of DNA analysis, and how exactly does this snapshot product work?
The forensic tools with DNA to date are fabulous for what they do, but they treat the DNA like a fingerprint, like a biometric, like an iris scan. And so they're very good for that identity matching, but they really don't take advantage of all the genetic information that's available in DNA. So with Snapshot, we use different instrumentation and we look at that genetic component. And over the course of the history of that snapshot development project, we developed models, predictive models, for predicting eye color, hair color, skin color, freckling, face shape, and ancestry. The core idea there is if you have enough examples of DNA in blue-eyed people and DNA of brown-eyed people, maybe you can find genes that turn on or off depending on whether it's brown or blue. And I'm oversimplifying, but that's the basic idea. And in 2015, we began offering that to law enforcement as a service offering.
So that's kind of Snapshot in a nutshell, and that's effectively they're producing a digital composite of what the person may look like. And they're working with information that is based on averages, and essentially the more of these comparisons they do against real people, the better their predictions become. It's been debated, and I've kind of been on both sides of this conversation before. How helpful is the Snapshot product? Are there particular cases that you guys find it more helpful for or less helpful? Let's start with Gray on this.
Well, I don't have a particular case, but it helps you weed out, half a population or even more based on what you get back. So determine the race, eye color, skin tone, and that type of thing. And I think that's very useful in that case, because you might have a list of suspects that you can immediately wipe out 70% of them and focus in on those.
Definitely.
Yeah, the remaining 30%.
Yeah. How about it, Morph? What cases is this product good for?
I think it's helpful in any case just to have an idea of what the person looks like, but we have to remember it's not a photograph. It's a rendering based on what DNA says. It doesn't account for if the person weighs more or less than they look in that snapshot, or if they've got a beard, or if they've got a shaved head versus long hair. There's different things that make that sort of misleading because the person may not look very close to that snapshot.
Where I'm a little leery with it is in terms of using it as a tool for identifying suspects, particularly in homicide cases. And I think it's just because of seeing what the police are going through with the Delphi case, where they're constantly having to come out. Every time they put out a composite, they've done this twice now. There's an article that comes out soon after that saying, stop sending us comparisons of this picture. Stop sending us, I saw this guy on Facebook and here it is next to the composite. Is this the guy? That's really not helpful to us. And that's why I struggle with its use like that. For a police department to put out something that is a digital composite that is, I don't know that you could use it for identification at that level. I worry about how they might be flooded with bad information or bad tips that are coming back to them. However, yeah, go ahead, Gray.
Well, I was going to say, like in the Delphi case, they had that news sketch and they said, this is the suspect. They were just, this is what he looks like. So when they say don't do side-by-sides, then now you're casting doubt on what you just said. You said, this is the suspect. This is what he looks like. Right. But I'm not a fan at all of the side-by-sides. I think they are ludicrous. I mean, I've been put on one of the sides of a side-by-side because people just want to put out anybody who has a goatee. So Morph, you're next.
Right.
And then John, if you just get a little mustache portion there, you'll be right next to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's one good thing about the snapshot, or should I say the forensic genealogy, genetic genealogy, is that it's sort of taking the place of the snapshot.
Yeah.
You don't have to rely on the snapshot anymore of what the person may or may not look like. You can narrow it down based on their family tree, build a list of suspects, get a short list, and go out and search each one of those people on that short list for a 100% match. So I think the snapshot is sort of yesterday's news as far as the DNA work goes.
I hope they'll keep working on that model, though, because I do think that the technology will get better. I do think that their predictions with more data should get more accurate, and with a better understanding of the genetic analysis, it might be something someday, you never know, where a hair sample could be found, they can run an analysis on it, and maybe it does spit out a pretty close to exact picture. You're right, there's always going to be environmental factors. You're not going to know if that person has a scar on their face or what type of hair, is it grown out? But I'm interested to see where that product goes. And it does seem like at least it worked as a stepping stone in terms of getting them into the law enforcement field, making them think about these other types of products and evolving to something like we have now with the genetic genealogy. The other thing that's really important about Snapshot that I think might be more helpful is in DOE cases where a body has been found. Usually in a lot of these cases, there's advanced decomposition. Traditionally, people will have artists try to do renderings of what this person might have looked like. So in that vein, I think this product could still be helpful going forward. But to your point, so is genetic genealogy, and we've seen that actually solve a couple of DOE cases. And of course, Gray did some fundraising to help solve a couple more cases in that vein.
What the part I thought was the most interesting is that they actually have face shape predictors. That was something I wasn't even aware that they were doing. And I did call Parabon and spoke to a tech one time, and he was saying that part is just based on sort of predictive models. It's not quite dialed in. So what you just said a minute ago about in the future, it could be really accurate. But at this point, it's they just kind of have some basic information that allows them to put different shapes of faces based on the DNA.
Yeah, let's hear from Stephen a little more about the accuracy of these predictive models and how law enforcement is using them.
What we found, to our delight, is that the models are very accurate, and we actually report our confidence in those predictions along with all the reports that we produce. For eye color, hair color, those kind of things, we're in the 90% confidence range. Every so often we'll say, green eyes or hazel, make those kind of subtle mistakes. And in the end, what we're producing is really a likeness of someone. And that's proving to be useful for law enforcement. From a law enforcement perspective, their primary goal starting off is just to exclude Who can they de-emphasize in an investigation? This composite is intended to be a likeness of the person whose DNA it came from, not a photo ID. And so they use these phenotypes in their investigation to narrow a suspect list or to jog someone's memory. And in that capacity, they're proving very effective.
I really appreciated that point of view because I didn't consider it that way. You know, when we think of a composite, like in something like the Delphi case, we're thinking they're putting that out because they don't know who the person is. What he's saying is more likely is that they have a list of a bunch of suspects, and then they're able to give them this digital composite, and they're able to look at their list of suspects and say, okay, well, obviously it's not the woman with blonde hair. Obviously it's not this gentleman that had green eyes. And they're able to drill it down to someone that it's more likely. And for eye color being at 90%, that's pretty strong. I don't know that, you know,
but I kind of agree with what Morph was saying, because if you're going to spend, I think the phenotyping is like 2,000 and it's 3,500. Why not just skip right over to the genealogy research? Because then you know exactly, I mean, you can find the actual person. Because what you're doing when you're getting the likeness is you're just sort of narrowing things down and let's look for this person. That's like early on in an investigation. Right. But for an extra 1,500, you can skip past all of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's, to me anyways, and again, maybe Parabon could have a better explanation to where it would make more sense to me. But to me, it's sort of, I look at it as buying a VHS tape instead of a CD. You know, right. It just seems like an older technology where if you're going to, for the same kind of money or close to the same kind of money, if you can get something that's going to be a more effective tool of catching these people, and in my opinion it is, then why wouldn't you just go right to that from the beginning?
Yeah.
They might have to just drop the price of phenotyping down dramatically. Like if you made that $500 or something, so you could just get going on a case. Then if you decide, you know what, we need to go to genealogy. But if it's that close in price, I would just go right to genealogy.
That's a really interesting point. If it could be used as a tool like that, and maybe the turnaround time would be much quicker on that, since I think basically it would probably be mostly a program that they're running. It doesn't take as much human interaction as the genealogy work actually does, where that can take weeks or even stretch out longer depending on their research. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think you're right that the pricing level it's at right now, it's too close. Maybe that will change. For this next clip, we are going to learn about the newer DNA technology now being used. We've all been talking about it. Let's hear from Stephen.
And then most recently, we've been using something called genetic genealogy, and that's what has made the news recently. And that's using the DNA along with a public genetic genealogy database called GEDMatch to try to come up with genetic relatives of an unknown DNA sample. And some of these cases are over 35 years old. And that's proving to be highly effective. This technology has marked a real turning point in the history of DNA forensics, and the law enforcement community is excited about it.
Certainly. And 35 years, I don't even know if that's the oldest one. I think I saw that a case was over 40 years old that was solved recently using this.
Yeah, 47, actually.
Wow.
Just recently, yeah.
Yeah, that is just amazing. So let's have Stephen explain the process to us.
So the process, many steps, I'll summarize them briefly. First, there's this just a screening process. In other words, we can't accept just any case. There's got to be DNA, and there's got to be sufficient quantity, and it has to be of sufficient quality. So we have screening forms that the DNA analyst for a particular case will fill out, and then our team can evaluate those cases, and we'll either accept a case or turn around and say, this particular sample is high risk. Can you get another extract? Is there other evidence that you can test, and so on? And in some cases, we just have to say, no, we can't take this case because this is the last of their evidence and the DNA they have isn't sufficient. But once we've accepted a case, then we can accept the sample. We'll have that sample shipped to one of our genotyping labs. They'll run it through the instruments, And what comes out the other side is a big text file. You can think of it as a spreadsheet with 1 million rows. And these are the alleles, the genotype calls for the various SNP markers. So with that genetic information, we then start applying our tools. We do a number of things. We'll do a genetic genealogy screening. So that involves uploading the file to GEDMatch and recording the top matches and how much DNA is shared. Because if we don't get matches that are sufficiently close, we really can't do genetic genealogy. So that's sort of stage one. Additionally, we'll do basic phenotyping. So we'll run it through models that predict ancestry, eye color, hair color, skin color, just the basics, because it turns out those tools are helpful when our genetic genealogists go to do their work. And then if the police want to proceed, if we've gotten good enough matches to warrant a deep investigation, they'll give us approval, and our genetic genealogy team will then go off and begin doing their detective work. And quite frankly, that's what it is. They're using DNA sharing information that comes from GEDMatch to identify matches. Then they do genealogy work. They've got to build backward into the family trees to find the most recent common ancestors of the unknown and a match. But at the end of this process, we'll provide a report to police that gives them, in the best case, here's an individual's name. It might be a family. And in really hard cases, it may be, here's a list of surnames that you should be looking for in your suspect list. And here are the most recent common ancestors, but there may be lots of descendants. So at that point, there may be a collaboration that goes on where the police have to do a lot of good police work, and they'll come back to us. Here's what we found. Here's a sample we want to have tested, and together we'll work on the case.
Once again, I just want to thank you more for another amazing interview. I've never heard someone kind of spell out the ABCs of how this process works so well, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to be sure to include that in today's episode. So, hope it didn't go too technical for people. I don't think it really did. Do you have any thoughts or insights, further thoughts or insights on this, guys?
Yeah, I just excited for that conversation because Steve cleared up a lot of things for me personally, and I hope it helps with listeners out there that are wondering, how does this whole thing work? How does the process work? And I think he shed a lot of light on that.
Yeah, I think it was pretty fascinating to hear how that all works, particularly how they come up with names of individuals, and then police can actually go out, do background checks on these people, see if they lived or are even viable at all as a suspect. Then they keep communicating back and forth with Parabon, I guess, in this case. And then they decide that, wow, this person really looks like a good suspect. Then they collect the DNA clandestinely, usually. Then they send that back in, and then boom, a match.
And I think it's also important to point out one thing that Steve mentioned. Just because a case has DNA doesn't mean that Parabon can do work with it. It has to be the right amount of DNA. It has to have been preserved properly. So just having a DNA sample alone doesn't automatically mean that Parabon's going to be a magic bullet to solving that case. Do
you know if the phenotyping takes less DNA than the actual genealogy?
I don't. I know the more DNA that they have, the better preserved it is, the more they can do with it. But with less DNA, you can maybe eliminate some suspects, but you can't necessarily include them. So that might be something that, a follow-up with Steve might be worth doing.
There are different levels. I recently attended a panel that spoke about this a little bit, and there's different types of DNA tests that can be done. One of the most simplest tests is where the information for the family relationships comes from. So I don't know if the phenotyping is actually a more intricate test than that first level test, or if they're able to do it all off that same level of test. But yeah, there are different definitely different types of tests that could be run. And it does sound like he's saying that they need an even better sample. So I'm not sure exactly what the cause for that is compared to knowing that there is this initial first level family connection that could be found on the more simple tests, the stuff that you do at like Ancestry or 23andMe and stuff like that. So interesting. Now we know that Coley wasn't a direct match. So how did Ozark PD track him down?
Sometimes we'll do targeted kinship testing, maybe a volunteer in the family who will give a buccal swab. And with that, we can either include or exclude large branches of the tree. And what we're seeing is these kind of leads are providing police with great starting points for these investigations, and they're finding positive DNA matches, with increasing frequency.
Yeah. Or in this case, it wasn't even a starting point. It was the start and the end point right in one shot. I also appreciate that I'm not getting the sense from this guy that he wants Parabon to take all the credit for these cases being cracked. He's being very clear that they are a part of the investigation, but that good police work has to follow that up to really kind of close the gap and cinch up the case. McCraney's legal defense team has tried to raise some questions about DNA analysis, even referring to it at one point as "do not ask." How big of a part does Parabond's analysis play in actually fully closing these cases?
Well, the first thing I would point out is that we're providing law enforcement with leads. And by definition, any case that we work on, they're going to have DNA on hand. So at the end of an investigation, they're ultimately going to use traditional DNA matching technologies to prove that a suspect is, in fact, a match. Our tools are not going to be used for that final claim that, this is the match to the DNA, because there are existing tools and protocols in place.
So I guess even in this case, and this is one of the areas where I get a little bit nervous about this case because it seems so focused on the DNA result and tying that to Coley. But we know they matched his DNA to semen samples that were found on JB. So once again, I don't know if Parabon did not do the processing on that. That was a local state lab, which we're going to read some reports from later, that did that final analysis. What do you guys think about this level? Do you have any thoughts or comments?
I think that the DNA work that Parabon did is a very important piece of the puzzle, because I think they gave them a short list of suspects. And as it was designed to do, they give them that short list of suspects. From there, it's police work that narrows it down and matches one to the suspect's DNA. So I don't think there's any easy way to just brush off what Parabon presented them with and how they came upon McCraney's name. To simply brush that away, I think, is a mistake. The science is good, it's proven, and I just don't think that the defense team can brush that off. Now, maybe they'll argue that, hey, his DNA is there, but he's got a reason for it being there. He's not the killer. That's a whole nother story. But I think the work Parabon did, giving the police a list of names with McCraney's name on it, I don't question that at all.
Yeah, and some of the stuff they called out Parabon for, like seeking attention, with headlines like this, I'm not really getting a sense that they need that type of exposure. People that know about cases now know about Parabon being a part of some of these cases being closed out. So I don't think they need that level of exposure. And honestly, a lot of what the legal defense team talked about in terms of attacking the DNA is a big part of the reason why I wanted to make sure to do an episode driving into the DNA, so we can really try to explain how this process works, reaching out to the people that actually do this process. You have a comment, Gray?
I was going to say that people like Parabon, and also I think DNA Doe Project, they do the same thing. It's the genealogists that are really the heroes. They take the DNA, and I guess it's put into a format, it's extracted, and then it's put into a format that can then be uploaded to GEDMatch. And then through that, you have these genealogists that are just absolutely phenomenal, that put together these whole trees, and then they give the leads to the police. I don't think they're not like trying to claim that we solved it, but they definitely are a massive, absolutely important resource. There's no way that the Golden State Killer case would have been solved, April Tinsley. I mean, the regular police work just wasn't working. But now with these leads, they can then deploy regular police work, but have absolutely viable leads that lead to an arrest in the case.
According to the preliminary trial, Coley McCraney didn't even come up on their radar in their initial investigation. So absolutely, Parabon played a very big part of this. Now, around all that, whenever we're talking about DNA genealogy and being used in this way in particular for law enforcement, people bring up the question of, what about my privacy? You know, you're using my information to track down my cousin or my brother in some cases. Let's see what Stephen has to say about privacy concerns.
Right after the announcement of the Golden State Killer case, there were some privacy concerns raised. But as folks really began to look closely at the actual practice of forensic genetic genealogy, you begin to realize that the practice isn't imposing on anyone's privacy. You know, we're using GEDMatch, which has as part of its terms and service, it states that, you know, law enforcement may use this website. So if you're a GEDMatch user, you have the option of making your kit private, so you can still use the tools. It's just no one can see your data. So you have complete control over that. And moreover, the data on GEDMatch is really not very sensitive data. It's not raw genetic content. GEDMatch simply calculates the amount of DNA sharing between other people in the database and your file.
So this is kind of a start to the privacy conversation, because we're going to get more into it when we're actually hearing from GEDMatch. But just as a quick light question to you guys, is it worth risking privacy to solve cases?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at a case like April Marie Tinsley, a little girl that was raped and murdered, and her killer had the audacity to go around years later, leaving letters and writing on barn doors, taunting the police. How can you not want to see that monster brought to justice? And this is a way to do it. This is a way going forward to bring these kind of people to pay for what they did.
Great.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just think people are already putting their information into Ancestry websites. They are doing it so that they can be linked to different family members. And that's really all they're doing, is they're uploading a person as a potential family member to millions and millions of people, and it comes back with hits. And the results are absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad that they're actually using that. I know that people think it's like Big Brother 1984 type stuff, but I don't look at it like that.
It does interest me. I do see that there is a challenge there, but DNA is such a strange thing because we're leaving it everywhere. We're leaving traces of it everywhere. That's how they're getting these samples when they're following around a suspect, and they see that they use a water bottle and they throw the water bottle in the trash, and then they go and collect that. So the privacy concerns, I guess, are really stemming from that information then being keyed back to a particular person's name. And in GEDMatch's case, that's a tool that is built to make those connections so that you can find family members you didn't know about and stuff like that. So it does raise an interesting question for me. I'm still kind of unsettled in terms of the privacy concerns on this, but maybe I won't be by the end of this episode. Let's go ahead and continue here. I want to give a very big thank you to Morph for conducting the interview, and of course, Stephen Armentrout and Parabon for providing all that wonderful information.
And we're going to move on to an interview with Curtis Rodgers, one of the founders of GEDMatch, a company that runs pretty much on volunteers.
Here is Curtis to tell us exactly what GEDMatch is.
Yeah, it's a website that was really designed for genealogy researchers, people who are trying to find relatives, and we have a database of autosomal DNA, which is different than forensics is using, but it gives you a much better opportunity to find relatives who are still living and have a common ancestor within the last 5 or 6 generations. And it turns out that this type of research is also beneficial for forensics.
So he's being pretty clear there. It's not a full and complete DNA sample that they're using in terms of GEDmatch. They're using like a subsection, almost like a thumbprint of the information, and then comparing that to other people to make those connections. So it's not like someone's going to be able to, take your sample from GEDmatch and clone another Gray Hughes or something ridiculous like that.
Well, that'd be too bad. Yeah.
It would be too bad.
It's important to point out that they can't just grab that profile and go create a DNA sample and put your DNA at another crime scene.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I think you should contact a science fiction writer with that. That's a really interesting aspect, to think that someone would fake DNA in the future and use that to contaminate a crime scene. Why is it called GEDmatch? Let's hear from Curtis.
Why GEDmatch? Because the family trees in the Latter-day Saints LDS Church, Mormons, are called GEDCOMs. They had developed a program called a GEDCOM so that they could trade family trees online. And GEDCOM has become a kind of a accepted name now for family trees. So what we were doing was matching family trees, GEDCOMs. So I decided to call it GEDmatch.
I had no idea. Did you guys know about that previously? I mean, I suppose you did, Morph, but what about Gray? Did you know about that?
I did not know how the name came, but I knew that the Mormon Church is really huge in genealogy. As a matter of fact, if you're ever going to trace your own family tree, just go there and go through their records, and they have almost everything.
Interesting. Let's continue with, how is GEDmatch different from other DNA services like 23andMe or Ancestry.com?
We are an adjunct to them. We are not in competition with them. They test people, and then they can match people that they've tested with other people they've tested. GEDmatch, people can put their own DNA from whatever testing company they've used onto GEDmatch, and then match with people who've been tested by other companies and are willing to put their DNA on our site, or their genetic information on our site. We also have some tremendous tools for researching using genetics that are not available on the testing company sites. So people want to be on GEDmatch, and the only way they can do that is to go test it by some other company. We don't do testing. So we are helping these companies, the testing companies, and they know it, and we work with them.
So, Morph, I believe you have uploaded your profile, right?
Yeah.
How was that process?
It was fairly simple. Luckily, I had a lot of conversations with Paul Holes. He's actually the one that walked me through it. But once I did it was very easy. Essentially, you send out your Ancestry.com or 23andme.com DNA. You spit in the tube, you send it out, and then you get your results. Well, one of the things you can ask for is your raw data from the DNA, and they'll send it to you, or you can download it right from their site in a zip file. And then all you do is, and it looks like code, it's got a bunch of numbers and gibberish on it that don't seem to make sense. And you simply upload that zip file into GEDmatch, and it does the work from there. It just finds out who your relatives are and how closely related you are to other people that have uploaded their DNA.
Now, what was your reasoning for the upload? Was it to do some type of family genealogy, or was it specifically to try to help fight crimes?
Oh, definitely to fight crimes. I knew once this happened that I want to be part of doing that and part of helping somebody out there. If I've got somebody in my family that is a rapist or a murderer, and this helps catch them, so be it. But what's important to remember here is that GEDmatch, at last I checked, only had, I think, 1 million samples of DNA in there to compare to. So I think the more people that can put them in there and put their samples in there to give law enforcement more to work with, it's only going to help solve more cases. If you take a private company like Ancestry.com, they have millions of DNA profiles, but the problem is they're private and they won't work with law enforcement. Law enforcement would need a warrant to be able to force them to give some of their information, and it's too broad a warrant it would be. So this is the easy fix. This is, you go to a place that is public where law enforcement can easily get into and is allowed to get into, and the people that use it agree to that their DNA may be looked at by law enforcement. And there's been a big surge in people putting their DNA in there, and I hope it continues.
One of the things I heard at the DNA panel I was recently attending is that you would only need 2% of the population to contribute to a database like that. And if you had 2%, you would be able to solve 90% of the cases that came their way. And apparently there's GEDMatch, and there's another service that is similar to it. And between those two services right now, they are just under 1% that has been added to both of those. And in particular, for solving cases for white people is quite a bit easier. There's a lot more genetic information in there for white people at this time. Gray, what about you? Have you done GEDMatch?
I have. One thing I was just thinking about, it would be great if a place like Ancestry.com, or Ancestry DNA, I guess is the name of it, but if they had an option where you could click that, and then it would automatically send the zip file to GEDMatch.
Yeah.
Because you're already selecting whether or not you want to keep it private or not. If they had that, it would really boost up the numbers in there. And yes, I did do it. And I downloaded the zip file and I sent it to GEDMatch, and it was weird. I only did it because of the crime element. My whole family had been putting their DNA in there, and I had always thought about doing it, but never did it. But then I thought, you know what? I got to get my DNA out there. Maybe it'll help somebody somewhere. And the hardest part was actually spitting into the tube. I mean, literally, it takes like you sitting there it takes forever. Your mouth gets all dry, and so that was the hardest part. So do it out there, everybody.
So how much did it cost from start to finish on that? I mean, GEDMatch, there's no charge, right? So you're paying for the test essentially. How much was that? Like $20, $25?
GEDMatch is 100% free. The Ancestry ones are typically just under $100. Sometimes you'll see them on sale around the Christmas holiday. You'll see them for some really low amount, like $69 or $89 or something like that. But it's funny. It reminds me of one of the memes that were going around out there that shows somebody being arrested, and it says sooner or later your cousin's gonna get a coupon to 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and you're gonna get busted.
I think you just showed your age a little bit by calling memes, but that's
memes,
okay.
Memes. You know what I mean.
I don't even have children. I know what a meme is.
Does GED? I don't even think GEDMatch has. I think it just relies on people uploading their DNA there, right? Or do they actually have a kit too? I don't think they do.
No, they don't have their own testing mechanism. Right. They don't have their own kit. But for anyone interested in doing this, you really want to look into the company that is doing the testing. From what I understand, Ancestry is one of the strongest in terms of protecting your information. 23andMe, I think there has been some cooperation with law enforcement on a case-by-case basis. And I think... what's the tree one? Something tree?
Family Tree now, I think.
Yeah, Family Tree, I think, has also had some type of cooperation with law enforcement at some levels. So that's one of the things that I learned from that panel also. Not each of those testing companies is the same with their privacy protection. But in terms of GEDMatch, we're going to learn that there's a lot that you can do to keep your information private there, or even pull it down if you want. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and continue with Curtis here. Do you have control of your DNA on GEDMatch?
We do not upload anything. It's uploaded by the people who own that data, and that's the person who is tested. They have full control over their data. They can upload it to GEDMatch. They can delete it from GEDMatch. They have complete control over that. We do not do anything with their data other than provide tools so that they can find matches.
He sounds pretty fired up on that one. He certainly sounds passionate about it. And from what I understand, if you did want to upload it to GEDMatch just to do the family matching, you can do that. As Parabon mentioned, you can set it to a private kit. But Curtis also says that you can actually remove it from the site. So you could essentially upload it, do your research, figure out your family connections, and then delete your profile completely. So sounds like it's about as safe as it can be in terms of a service like that. And I like that he didn't kind of go with the Facebook mentality of, once it's there, it's always there in some way, even if you try to delete it. Continuing, Curtis was initially surprised that law enforcement was using his service to solve crimes, but he's clear that he understands what a difference it's making.
This is a whole new way of forensics looking at things. We are able to provide suspects where suspects did not exist before.
And honestly, I think that's the biggest point. Like in Coley's case, didn't come up on the radar in terms of the investigation. Curtis also told a story about a woman who contacted him saying that she wanted her profile there because her father was a serial killer. And she specifically wanted closure for any families of the victims that he had affected. So you've got people kind of all over the board in terms of the conversation here when it comes to privacy. People going as far as this woman who knows that there is a criminal in her family and wants to help solve those cases. So while Curtis is recognizing the difference GEDmatch is making with certain cases, is he proud of how law enforcement is using GEDmatch?
That is an issue that has kept me awake many, many nights. On one hand, I want to do everything I can to protect the people that are using our site. On the other hand, people like the Golden State Killer make Jack the Ripper look like a choir boy. And hey, it's good that he's off the streets. And I can't tell you how many emails I have received from people who lived in California at the time, whose whole life has been affected by this Golden State Killer, knowing that he was still out there. So yeah, I to answer your question, I'm concerned. We can't prevent people from putting information on our site. We're there so people can. What we can do is educate them, make sure that they understand that when they put their information on our site, it is visible to law enforcement and everyone else. So we've gone on a tremendous campaign to make sure that as much as possible, all of our people know things like this interview, to help people understand what happens. We don't think we're violating privacy anymore, as I said, than all these other databases, but we still want to make sure that our people are as educated as possible.
When you guys were uploading your data, did you see any information or warnings about it being used for law enforcement?
I don't remember seeing anything specifically for that, just that it could be accessed publicly.
I'm just wondering if they have a big obvious prompt, hey, you're uploading and please keep in mind our terms of service where this could be used by law enforcement.
It's definitely like if you're the kind of person that reads all the, the small print, it's in there.
Yeah.
I knew about it only because learning this whole experience, learning how the whole process worked, I knew ahead of time that it was in there someplace. And then I found it just so I could say I read it. But a lot of people may or may not read that small print when they use this service or any other service that they agree to do something with. There's different things in that small print, and there is the warning in there that says your DNA may be accessed by law enforcement or people you're not intending for it to be seen by. So your profile could be visible to someone else. So that is in there, and they're out because that warning is in the agreement that people agree to when they sign up.
Well, I do appreciate that he recognizes trying to put the word out, through social media by doing interviews like this, and that he was willing to do that. Let's get a final word of wisdom from Curtis about genetic genealogy.
Genealogy is a contact sport. You have to contact your relatives, and that's what we're there for.
There have been some changes when it comes to GEDmatch. Of course, we laid out all this information for you, and we want to give you the best, most up-to-date info that we can. So, Gray, do you want to describe to us what has happened with GEDmatch?
They actually provided DNA for a case where it wasn't in the guidelines that was laid out. It was not for a murder or a rape. It was for an assault. And they were called out on it. So instead of just saying, yes, we made a mistake, that won't happen again, they made drastic changes to the entire GEDMatch system where now people have to literally opt in. They've removed everybody being opted into allowing law enforcement to look at their data as the default. They've now removed all of that, and people now literally have to check a box to be opted in. And that means that the entire million accounts that were in there prior have been taken away from law enforcement's use.
So this is definitely a bit of a hit in terms of using GEDMatch as a tool and solving these cases like we've seen over the past year. I mean, just so many cases solved using this tool. But it's not the end of it, essentially. If they want to help, if you are in GEDMatch, please go log in and opt in. Opt in for law enforcement's use of your information. That's the only way we're going to get to grow this back to a system that might be helpful in this way. Morph, do you have any comments or insights on this?
Yeah, it's a devastating blow, no doubt about it, to law enforcement, to families out there waiting for answers in their cases. Just in JB's and Tracie's case, they sort of slipped in right before this was implemented. So there's a lot of other families out there probably that are still out there waiting, that were in the middle of this work being done on their case, and now they're going to wait even longer. But if there's a silver lining, it's that it's not dead to law enforcement, but it's an uphill battle because now they've got to get those million people that were already in GEDMatch, had their profiles on GEDMatch, to all go back in and authorize their DNA profiles to be read by law enforcement. So it's no doubt it's going to take some time, and who knows how many people will opt back into it, but it's not totally dead, but definitely it's a blow to law enforcement.
Yeah, and it's going to take people like you talking about this. So that's why we wanted to be sure to get this in today's episode. If you're in GEDMatch, go and opt in. Talk to your friends about it. If you think they're in GEDMatch as well, talk to your family about it. We need to spread awareness to this and get this tool back into I don't want to say working order. I mean, it's still effectively working. It's just the percentages have been severely cut down in terms of the type of genealogical matches that can be done for law enforcement. So
up next, we're hearing from Colleen Fitzpatrick.
Now, it takes a good genetic genealogist to do the DNA detective work, and Morph also interviewed one of the best, Colleen Fitzpatrick, who works with nonprofit DNADoeProject.org, the organization responsible for identifying Joseph Newton Chandler and many others. She has her own company that you can learn more about at www.identifinders.com. Colleen has also written a few books on DNA and forensic genealogy. Here she is to tell us about when she started working with law enforcement on cold cases and the first big step in this new technology.
About 2011, I started working cold cases with the police. So after, doing a few cases, I finally connected with the Phoenix Police Department, and I wound up solving the Phoenix Canal murders. That was my first big cold case. I actually solved it in 2014, but the agency asked me to keep quiet about it because you can imagine this was the first case solved with genetic genealogy, and nobody knew what to do about it, what it meant. I had given them the name Miller as probable last name of the killer, and that narrowed their list of suspects from 2000 to 5. And of those 5, there was just one that made any sense, and that was the man that's now going to be tried for those murders because, of course, they followed it up with, getting a DNA sample from him and getting a CODIS match. So it wasn't just I told them something and they went out and arrested him. They had a lot of police work to do after I gave them that name.
Is there a difference doing DNA genealogy work on a John Doe case versus finding a murderer? Here's Colleen again.
The difference between, a John Doe, and which would include Mr. Chandler, because he was a John Doe, and a serial killer, it's not so much on our end what we do and how we work. It's more likely on the family's end, because you're really walking into, or you're helping with two different situations. In one case, let's say you have a serial killer case, you're working with some police agency, and you have, a bunch of victims, a bunch of families. it's in the family's best interest to keep that case in the news, to keep the authorities on track, to let people know it hasn't been solved yet. And when you do the genealogy work, let's say you came up with somebody named John Smith that solved it, we always go to the agency, we let the agency handle it, but the family is going to be more than relieved. But on the other hand, when it's a John or Jane Doe and you identify them, the family that the agency is going to contact has no idea that you're getting ready to contact them. They have wondered what happened to their family member for years, and they thought everybody forgot. There's a few cases, say, that are very interesting, and the name Orange Socks, Lavender Doe, Buckskin Girl. But for the most part, the family hasn't probably heard too much. There hasn't been too much movement on the case. And when the authorities, contact them, it's a surprise. And of course, they're in a different position. It's easy to say, hey, we found your daughter's killer. It's hard to say, we found your daughter, she was strangled 37 years ago. That's a shock.
And once again, this is why I really appreciate having interviews with the people actually doing this work. I didn't even consider that angle there. Two very big differences in terms of the family contact.
She's probably one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to. And she was telling me that they actually figured out who one of the babies was on the Titanic. I mean, that is incredible. I think they actually had to, I don't remember if they had to exhume the baby that was buried in an unmarked, it was known to be part of the Titanic, but they didn't know who it was.
Right.
And they finally identified that baby. And she's really the queen of identifying bones from a long time ago. We're talking about, I think when I was talking to her, it sounds like she is part of actually creating this whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that she takes time to speak to other people about it. She's been in contact with me through email a few times as well. And I really appreciate that. When you find someone that's so good at their work like that, and they're willing to actually share that with other people so we could help explain it properly, just like we're doing with today's interview, it's pretty amazing. Interesting question. How does it feel to crack a case? Let's hear what Colleen has to say about that.
There's really nothing like really making it work and bringing satisfaction or bringing information to the family. And I don't want to use the word closure. We use it on our end because we would close a case, but we don't want to use it on the other end because, like Buckskin Girl's mother told us, there is no closure. Her daughter is never coming back. There's only information, there's only knowledge of what happened that she can now go on with her life and cope with. So there is accomplishment. There's also a sense of responsibility to continue to help, to be available as much as we can to navigate the next step.
Yeah. And once again, even the topic of, trying to enjoy the moment of cracking the case is still saddled by now there's a family that you have to reach out to and you have to talk to. And it's interesting that she made that note about closure too. I'll never forget, a missing persons case I was looking into, and the body was eventually found, and the mother said, "Screw closure. It took my hope." So it's a really, really interesting thing that Colleen obviously has to straddle this line constantly with dealing with the families. Ultimately, why does she do this? Let's hear it from her.
I'm not out for publicity or to make tons of money or to make a name for myself. I'm just out to do good work and help, and I'm well known for that.
So once again, I just want to thank Steve Armentrout from Parabon, Curtis Rodgers from GEDMatch, and Colleen Fitzpatrick from Identifinders for providing all this information. And again, this is from episodes that we did on criminology, my other podcast. I hope you all check that out. But this information, as you've heard them detail, is just very enlightening and helps us all understand this process a lot better.
And it's applying to more and more cases as we have more of them solved with this mechanism.
I want to just say, let me throw something there. I think those are great interviews, by the way. Literally just absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, is it okay? DNA Doe Project is Colleen Fitzpatrick's organization. It's nonprofit, and you can donate their site. Hopefully people out there would want to donate to something like that, because they do a lot of their research for free.
Yep, absolutely. DNADoproject.org if you guys want to check it out for yourselves and possibly donate. Now, in terms of Coley McCraney, the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences did the comparison analysis of Coley McCraney's DNA. And to give you guys some idea of what types of numbers we're talking about with that DNA comparison, first of all, the DNA detected came from vaginal swabs identified to be from J.B. Beasley. They're saying that there was a mixture in those swabs, at least one of which must be male, and that Coley McCraney and J.B. Beasley are included as potential contributors to this mixture. The probability of including a random, unrelated individual as a potential contributor to this mixture is approximately 1 in 14 million Caucasian individuals and 1 of 48.6 million African American individuals. So very strong stats, but still not quite out of the realm of possibility when you consider how many people are on this earth. However, there are other tests that were conducted. The DNA detected from the stains on the sweater and the DNA profile of Coley Lewis McCraney match. This combination of genetic traits occurs in approximately 1 of 38.3 decillion random unrelated Caucasian individuals and 1 of 129 nonillion random unrelated African American individuals. So these results can't be contested with the numbers that they're talking about here.
That's a lot of zeros.
It's a lot of zeros.
And I'm going to predict this right now, that neither of you have heard of the term decillion or nonillion before this.
First time I've said it in my life, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard it thrown around, but again, I've never counted up the zeros. I just know it's a lot.
Well, there's 9 zeros in a billion, and this one of them, the decillion, had 34 zeros, and then is it 32 zeros on the
on the nonillion? Yeah.
There's not that many people on Earth. We can rephrase it in a more simple way.
Right. Not even close.
There's no other possibility.
Absolutely. So based on everything that we've learned now, guys, over the past 2 episodes, we talked to Sarah Kalin, a criminal behaviorist. Now we've heard from the experts in terms of the DNA. We've heard the numbers that are included with the probabilities on this DNA. What are your feelings about the case against Coley McCraney?
I think it comes down to what the jury thinks. If they think that his DNA is there because of the fact that he raped and murdered the girls, or should I say JB, and then murdered Tracie, then they're going to find him guilty of that. If they think that he somehow was only in some sort of relationship and it was consensual, perhaps the defense, or perhaps the prosecution, I should say, won't be able to prove their case, and he could somehow get off. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Great.
Yeah. I actually think there's no chance that DNA is not his. So I think it really just comes down to proving if he knew JB prior to that night. If he did not know her, then I think at that point you have to decide that something nefarious happened.
Yeah. And it does raise,
on his part.
It raises a huge question, which is, why didn't he admit to knowing them when he was in the interview room? So it's definitely going to be the linchpin of the case, but it's going to take some additional information, I think, because I think you're right. I think there could be a shadow of a doubt in terms of, was it put there in a willing situation, or is this part of the actual act of the murder?
We are doing our final live stream on July 31st, and that happens to be JB Beasley's birthday, and the same night that 20 years ago, JB and Tracie's lives were senselessly taken by a monster. Please join us in the conversation by searching for Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell. All right. And then there's even a little drop down, I guess, that you can select all videos, because if you don't do that, YouTube will just send you whatever hell videos they want to send you.
Yeah. You can also find video versions of our podcast at my YouTube channel, Lord and Arts. And since we're intentionally trying to raise exposure using each of our platforms, remember, you can always find all the information and links you need for any specific episode all together in one place at www.threemenandamystery.com. And that's with the number 3. You'll also find contact info there for local law enforcement and both legal teams. So if you have information to help shine the light of truth on this case, please send it in.
If you have any feedback, corrections, or new details, they can be sent in to us via email at 3men@threemenandamystery.com, again with the number 3. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at 3Men&a-Mystery. You can also find us on Facebook. And if you're looking for another true crime podcast to listen to while you're waiting for another episode of 3 Men and a Mystery, consider listening to Southern Fried True Crime. Here's a sample.
Hey there, this is Erica Kelly, host of the podcast Southern Fried True Crime. Each week, I take a look at a different Southern crime, and like any good gossip, I'm interested in anyone or anything. I cover contemporary and historical cases, and I love listener suggestions. Come join me as I explore the dark underbelly of the Deep South. I'm a one-woman show in a narrative format, kind of like sitting by the fire and listening to a story. So pull up a chair and subscribe if you're interested. I'd love to have you. You can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and just about any podcast platform. Just search for Southern Fried True Crime. Until then, y'all take care.
3 Men and a Mystery is produced by John Lorden, Mike Morford, and Gray Hughes.
Please be sure to rate us on the podcasting platform that you found us on and help us grow by telling your friends and family about us.
We hope you'll join us in the next episode. I'm John Lorden.
I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Gray Hughes.
And we are 3 Men and a Mystery.